celebrating 75 years of excellence, the Reid technique. The Reid technique of interviewing and interrogation has evolved extensively over the last 75 years. Here is a brief overview. Our company was founded in September of 1947 by John Reid. John Reid and Fred Imbaugh, the first director of the Chicago Police Crime Detection Laboratory, were instrumental in studying the interrogation process and developing a psychological approach that respected the individual, doing away with the third degree. They published the first edition of their seminal book, Criminal Interrogation and Confessions, in 1962, quickly becoming the Bible for the profession. Subsequent editions were issued in 67, 86, 2004, and 2013. The textbook and many of our training materials have been translated into a number of languages, including Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, German, and Turkish. The content of the Criminal Interrogation and Confessions book has expanded significantly over the years, from 214 pages in 1962 to 469 pages in the 5th edition, which now includes chapters and discussions about distinguishing between true and false confessions, testifying on a confession, interrogation research, confession voluntariness, trustworthiness, and corroboration, how the courts view the testimony of false confession experts, and how the courts confirm the core principles of the Reid technique, which in fact are: always treat the subject with dignity and respect, always conduct interviews and interrogations in accordance with the guidelines established by the courts, do not make any promises of leniency or threats of harm or inevitable consequences, do not conduct interrogations for an excessively lengthy period of time, do not deny the subject any of their rights, and do not deny the subject the chance to satisfy their physical needs. Also, we must remember to exercise special precautions when questioning socially immature juveniles or individuals with mental or psychological impairments. Our initial training programs on the Reid technique of interviewing and interrogation were introduced in the mid-1970s. At that time, they were 2-day programs. They have since evolved to 4-day programs. And we increased our training schedule from 12 courses a year to literally hundreds of programs every year. With respect to international training, we have conducted training programs in over 30 countries around the world, some of the locations you can see on the screen. Over the decades, we have developed a number of specialized training programs. The Reid technique of investigative interviewing and positive persuasion. This is a training program for non-law enforcement investigators. Hiring the best, applicant interviewing techniques and strategies. The Reid technique of investigative interviewing and positive persuasion for child abuse investigations. Physical and neglect, child abuse injury reconstruction techniques. Emerging trends in sexual abuse investigations. Reid military instructional program and non-coercive human military intelligence and counterintelligence interviewing. Forensic interviewing for attorneys, and the Reid Peace method of investigative interviewing. And with the advent of COVID in March of 2020, where we were precluded from doing any in-person training programs for a number of months, we introduced 2 virtual training programs, which we still offer today: the Reid technique of investigative interviewing and positive persuasion, and hiring the best applicant interviewing strategies. In addition to our book, Criminal Interrogation and Confessions, members of our staff have written the following books: Essentials of the Reid Technique, How to Identify, Interview, and Motivate Child Abuse Offenders to Tell the Truth, Anatomy of Interrogation Themes, A Field Guide to the Reid Technique, Electronic Recording of Interrogations, and the Investigator Anthology. We've also created a number of audio and video training programs: Hiring the Best, Interviewing for Integrity, Hiring the Best, Verifying the Employment Application, the Reid technique of interviewing and interrogation, Employee Theft, the application of the Reid technique, Child Sexual Abuse, application of the Reid technique, Employee Theft Investigations, Interviewing Techniques for Harassment Investigations, Telephone Interviewing Techniques, and sexual assault interrogation. We also developed 2 online audio/PowerPoint training programs, the Reid technique of interviewing and interrogation for investigators and the Reid technique of interviewing and interrogation for school administrators. As I mentioned, once COVID came into play, we were precluded from doing any in-person training programs for a number of months. During which time, however, we created several online video training programs. The Reid technique for patrol officers, for telephone investigative interviews, for human trafficking interrogations, for pre-employment interviewing strategies, and for child abuse investigations, parts 1 and 2. We also had the opportunity to develop a YouTube channel called the Reid Technique Tips. Our YouTube channel has 6 playlists with a number of video presentations for each one. The first playlist is entitled Who We Are and What is the Reid Technique, and has video presentations entitled About the Company, Description of the Reid Technique, the core principles of the Reid technique, best practices, and research confirming the Reid technique process. Our second playlist is entitled Interviewing, with video presentations preparing for the interview, proper room setting, using open-ended questions, parts 1 and 2, there is no behavior unique to lying, the value of behavior-provoking questions, a case study, do not tell the subject what you know, cognitive interviewing, and key principles to keep in mind when conducting an interview. Our third playlist is entitled Interrogation, with video presentations, positive persuasion, empathy and understanding, projection and rationalization, minimization and maximization, gang crime interrogations, questioning juvenile offenders, the value of recording interrogations, what is the non-confrontational approach, and the final video is entitled Guilt Presumptive Approach, Privacy, and the Purpose of an Interrogation. Our fourth playlist is entitled False Confession Issues, with video presentations entitled Clarifying Misrepresentations about Law Enforcement Interrogation Techniques, what questions to ask to determine the voluntariness and validity of a subject's confession, false confessions, the issues to be considered, parts 1 and 2, and is it permissible to lie to a suspect about evidence? Our fifth playlist is entitled Pre-Employment Interviews and has 2 video presentations. The biggest mistake we can make when interviewing job applicants and creating an environment conducive to truth-telling. And our final playlist lists our different courses and describes some of the content of those programs. The courts and the Reid technique. On 2 occasions, the Supreme Court has referenced our textbook, Criminal Interrogation Confessions, in making their decisions because the content of our book was supportive of the positions that they had taken. Courts throughout the country have recognized the Reid technique as the leading interview and interrogation approach to be used today. You can use the link you see on the screen for a detailed list of cases from our website. The courts reject the implication or suggestion that the Reid technique is in any way coercive. As an example, consider the decision in the case of U.S. versus Jocks. Quote, in sum, the proffered expert testimony to the effect that the Reid technique enhanced the risk of an unreliable confession lacked any objective basis for support whatsoever. Although Professor Hirsch insisted that there is a wealth of information about the risks of the Reid technique, he could point to none. Courts have admonished investigators when they have not followed our suggested guidelines and procedures. For example, in People versus Elias, the court pointed out that the investigators did not follow our guidelines because they did not conduct a non-accusatory interview before initiating an interrogation. They misrepresented case evidence when questioning a socially immature 13-year-old. They did not include any corroboration in the incriminating statement, and in fact, they even contaminated the statement by disclosing details of the crime. In U.S. versus Preston, the U.S. Court of Appeals said that under the totality of circumstances, including Preston's intellectual disability, we conclude that the confession that resulted from the questioning was involuntarily given and should not have been admitted at trial. And when they referenced our book, they pointed out that the officers disregarded our cautions about the tactics that should be used when questioning a 13-year-old individual. Our expertise on the topic of behavior symptom analysis was recognized by the National Security Agency, which awarded Johnny Reid and Associates, in conjunction with Michigan State University, a sole source bid for a scientific study on the use of behavior symptoms in the detection of deception. The results of the study were published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences. Over the years, we've had the opportunity to work with the Innocence Project in New York on a number of cases, serving as expert witnesses on proper interview and interrogation procedures. And in one case, the exoneration of one of their clients by obtaining a confession from the actual offender. This particular case was detailed in the story I Did It, which was published in the New York Magazine. You see a website link to that story. We've also assisted other attorneys around the country in wrongful conviction cases. Reid as the gold standard. In the Netflix series Making a Murderer Part 2, which was shown in 2018, the interrogation of Brendan Dassey is discussed during the first 15 minutes of Episode 2 by the attorneys who represented Dassey in his appeals. The two attorneys are shown on screen giving a presentation to lawyers at Northwestern University Law School, discussing the Dassey interrogation. During their presentation, they referenced John E. Reid and Associates as the benchmark for proper interrogation practices and procedures. Over the years, numerous international research studies have been conducted on the Reid technique, research from Japan, Korea, Spain, Canada, and the United States. All of the studies established the validity of various core elements of the Reid technique, including research from the High Value Detainee Group, which was established by President Obama in 2009 to look at the most effective way to develop information from people suspected of being involved in terrorist activities. Over the years, we have created investigator tips, which we publish on our website. I think about 180 of them are currently posted. In 1999, we created the Reid Institute, a membership organization of Reid graduates. So we've been busy over the last 7 decades, and we'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for your support as we continue to present the finest training in the world on interviewing and interrogation procedures. Thank you very much for taking a few minutes to listen to this presentation.